By the time my mother told the probate attorney I had always been more like help than family, I was already sitting at the end of the conference table with the only document in that room that mattered. I'm Lena Hart, 27, and I work in title compliance for a real estate firm in Columbus, which is a dry way of saying I know exactly how ownership survives the stories people tell over it. My parents spent years treating me like the family servant in the house I scrubbed, stocked, and kept running while my brother and sister were allowed to drift in and out like guests. I cooked holiday meals, handled medications, paid contractors when pipes burst, and somehow still became the one they spoke around, not to, the useful daughter, the invisible one. Then my father died, and everybody suddenly started talking about the house as if I were furniture. They didn't know he had signed the deed over 2 years earlier, quietly, legally, only to me. What happened next wasn't loud. It was worse for them than loud. People always imagine family cruelty as something obvious. A slammed door, a raised hand, a sentence so vicious that anyone in the room would recognize it. That wasn't how it worked in my house. In my house, injury came dressed as routine. It wore an apron, carried grocery bags, and answered to practicality. My mother liked to call me the dependable one, and for years people mistook that for praise. What she meant was simpler. I was the child she could assign things to, without having to consider my feelings afterward. By 16, I knew my father's medication schedule, the names of 2 plumbers, and how to stretch a week of groceries into 10 days. My older brother, Evan, was finding himself. My younger sister, Marisol, was sensitive and therefore not to be burdened. I was neither. I was load-bearing. That was the family architecture. Nobody announced it. Everybody lived inside it. If church friends came over, I wiped down the kitchen and set the table. If tax season arrived, my father's banker's boxes landed in my room. When Evan missed a car payment, it was a rough patch. When I forgot one errand after work and class, my mother asked why I was becoming careless. Love was not withdrawn all at once in my family. It was redistributed, quietly, repeatedly, until one person ran on duty while everyone else still got to call it affection. The worst part was that I was good at the role. Competence becomes consent in other people's minds. If you keep solving problems, they stop seeing the cost and only see the convenience. I graduated near the top of my class, worked through college, and still drove back to my parents' house several nights a week because my father trusted me with bills more than he trusted online banking. My mother said it calmed him when I handled the statements in front of him. I believed that mattered. I believed being needed was a form of being loved. It isn't, not always. Evan had charm, the loose kind that made strangers trust him too fast. He sold confidence before he ever sold anything real, and later that became his actual career. My mother adored the performance of him. Marisol was quieter and more strategic. She had a talent for fragility. She could say, "I'm overwhelmed," in a tone that made other people feel cruel for asking one more thing of her. So they asked me instead. No one in my family thought of themselves as unfair. They thought I was strong. They thought I understood. They thought I didn't need much. The lie at the center of my childhood was never that I was unloved. It was that I could survive on less. By the time I started at Halpern and Boyd, the real estate firm where I moved into title compliance, I had already become fluent in documents, signatures, and the quiet arrogance of people who assume ownership belongs to whoever speaks most confidently about it. I liked the work because paper had rules. A claim either held or it didn't. A name was either on record or it wasn't. There was relief in that. My father respected that job more than he said. He noticed precision. He noticed when I corrected a contractor's invoice and saved him money. He noticed when I caught an insurance lapse before a storm claim. One night, I sat with him at the dining room table, yellow lamplight across his pill organizer and a stack of property tax notices, explaining the difference between joint tenancy and transfer on death instruments because he wanted to understand it properly. My mother left the room halfway through. Marisol took a call on the porch. Evan never came at all. At the time, I thought that evening meant nothing. I was wrong. A month later, my mother announced Easter brunch and told me to come early for setup, the way some people ask for labor and call it family. When I arrived, the sink was full, the folding chairs were still dusty from the basement, and Marisol was upstairs curling her hair while Evan lounged in the den, explaining cryptocurrency to my father as if volume were a substitute for literacy. I stood there, with my purse still on my shoulder, looking at the uncooked ham on the counter and the stack of platters I would be expected to wash before anyone else even sat down, and felt something inside me shift. Not enough to break. Enough to register the fault line. Then I heard Evan laugh and say, "When Dad's gone, we should just sell this place and split it, clean and easy." My father didn't answer right away. But he didn't say no. The betrayal did not begin with a scream. It began with a folder. 3 weeks after Easter, my father had a dizzy spell in the garage and hit his shoulder on the concrete step. It looked worse than it was, but at 68, with blood pressure medication and a body that had started negotiating with gravity, not serious, still meant an ER visit. Evan arrived near the end carrying coffee and concern in equal theatrical portions. Marisol cried in the hallway where nurses could see her. I drove my parents home after midnight. My father was sore and embarrassed. My mother kept saying, "We can't keep living like this," which sounded less like fear and more like inventory. I stayed long enough to set out his medication, write down the follow-up appointment, and check the back door lock. Before I left, my father touched my wrist and said, very quietly, "Thank you, kid." The next Sunday, my mother asked us all to come by because she wanted to talk about the future like adults. In families like mine, adulthood was usually invoked right before someone tried to turn convenience into moral principle. The dining room looked staged, legal pad, water glasses, my father in his usual chair, one arm stiff from the fall, Evan leaning back, already innocent in his own mind. Marisol with her hands folded, face arranged into concern. On the table, beside my mother's purse, was a blue expanding folder I recognized immediately. It was the house folder I had built over years: contractor receipts, pharmacy printouts, insurance renewals, copies of tax payments, appliance warranties, all the paper debris that accumulates when one person is always the one keeping a home from quietly coming apart. My mother rested her hand on it as if she had discovered evidence. "Evan thinks it would be better," she said, "if someone else took over Dad's finances for a while." For a second, I thought she meant a professional. Then Evan slid a few pages out of the folder and tapped one with 2 fingers. "There are reimbursements in here," he said. "Transfers from Dad's account to yours." The sentence landed exactly the way he intended. Clean. Suggestive. I looked at the pages. 2 reimbursements for a furnace repair I had paid up front when my father's debit card had frozen on a fraud hold. A hardware store run after a pipe leak. Prescription pickup costs. Every amount matched a receipt clipped behind it. "That money covered expenses I fronted," I said. "You can see the receipts." Evan gave me a thin smile. "That's not really the point." It was the entire point. Marisol leaned forward in the voice she used when she wanted cruelty to pass as sensitivity. "No one is accusing you of anything criminal, Lena. We're saying the boundaries got blurry." Blurry. I had spent my whole adult life making their chaos legible. Suddenly the problem was my proximity to it. I turned to my father. Dad, you know what those are. He looked at the papers, then at my mother. Not at me. That was the first cut. My mother exhaled through her nose. You've been too involved, she said. That may have made sense before, but now it's creating confusion. People are starting to notice. Who is noticing? I asked. Evan answered before she could. Honestly, it doesn't look great that you're always here, always handling documents, always talking to Dad alone about property and bills. There it was. Not concern. Narrative. He had taken my competence, my access, my years of unpaid labor, and reassembled them into motive. I felt the room change around me, the way a building feels different once you understand which beam is cracking. Marisol's eyes stayed soft. My mother's mouth tightened into something almost dignified. Evan kept his voice measured. That was what made it effective. Spoken calmly, the lie passed for reason. You think I'm taking advantage of him? I said. No, my mother replied too quickly. We think you may have lost perspective. That was worse. Theft can be disproven. Distortion is harder. My father finally spoke. Maybe it's better if Evan handles things for now. I had heard harsher sentences in my life. None of them cut deeper. Because it wasn't just about bills. It was about whose version of me would enter the family record, the daughter who kept the house functioning, or the daughter who had gotten too close to the paperwork and begun to want more than her share. I stood up slowly. The chair legs made a dry sound against the wood floor. Say it clearly, I said. If that's what you believe, say it clearly. No one did. They didn't need to. By then, the damage was already doing its work. I made the mistake people like me always make first. I assumed clarity would help. That night, I spread every receipt and reimbursement record across my apartment floor and built a timeline so clean it almost looked defensive. Date, vendor, amount, reason, repayment, furnace, motor, plumbing emergency, prescription pickup, grocery runs after my mother's surgery, screenshots of texts, photos of receipts, copies of transfers from my father's account back to mine. I even included the weekend I slept on their den sofa when he had the flu because my mother said she couldn't lift him alone. Facts calm me. Procedure calms me. I thought if I laid the structure out clearly enough, the truth would carry its own weight. It didn't. The next morning, I emailed all three of them. The subject line was neutral, documentation for review. I explained each reimbursement, attached the records, and asked for one thing only, that no one continue implying misuse of funds without reading the full file. My mother never replied. Marisol sent back 5 lines that managed to sound kind while refusing every material point. I'm sorry this feels painful, she wrote. I think everyone is just trying to create healthier boundaries around Dad. The sentence made my coffee go cold in my hand. Healthier boundaries. As if I were a contamination they were finally containing. Evan called instead. You need to stop escalating this, he said. Escalating? I asked. You accused me without saying the word. No one accused you. We said it looked inappropriate. That is an accusation. It's concern. I stood in my kitchen with one hand flat against the counter, looking down at the parking lot behind my building. Concern would have involved asking me first. He gave a short laugh. Lena, you always do this. You make yourself the expert and then act shocked when people feel controlled. That was the real move, not theft, character. Once someone reframes your competence as domination, every attempt to explain sounds like proof. I hung up before my voice could sharpen. Then my father went silent. That frightened me more than anything, Evan said. My father avoided conflict, but with me he usually bridged discomfort through ordinary requests. Need batteries. Can you check the insurance letter? Did you ever find that soup place? For 3 days, nothing. On Wednesday, I drove to the house after work. My key didn't fit the back door. I tried twice before I understood it. New lock, new resistance, final. I stood on the concrete step with my work bag still on my shoulder, listening to the refrigerator hum through the kitchen wall, and felt the truth settle into place before anyone said it. I knocked. My mother opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. Her face held that careful, tired expression people wear when they want their cruelty to look reasonable. "You should have called first," she said. "I did." No one answered. "We've decided it's better if visits are planned now." I looked at the chain, at her hand on the door, at the umbrella stand just inside the hall, the one I had bought after the old one split. My life with them had always been full of objects no one remembered I placed there. "I need to see Dad. He's resting." "I'll wait." "No," she said. The chain stayed in place. "Did you change the locks?" I asked. She hesitated. Evan thought it made sense. Not we, Evan, but she was the one holding the door closed. "I have never stolen from you," I said. Her mouth tightened. "Please stop using dramatic language. No one said that." "Then why am I on the porch?" For a second she had nothing, then she chose the family method. Minimize the wound until my reaction looked like the problem. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I smiled. Small, cold, harder for who? She closed the door. Not slammed, just closed. The chain slid first, then the latch. I stood there long enough for the motion light above the porch to switch on, though the sky was still pale. Mechanical recognition. The house still knew I was there, even if my family had decided not to. The rest reached me through other people. An aunt called to say my mother was worried about how intense I'd become around money. A cousin texted because Evan had implied I was under stress and not myself lately. Marisol sent one final message saying space might be good for everyone. By Sunday evening, I was no longer the daughter who had kept the house functioning. I was the daughter being managed. And I was completely outside the system. For the first week after they locked me out, I kept reaching for my phone at the wrong times. At 7:10 p.m., when I used to remind my father to take the second blood pressure pill. On Thursdays, when the pharmacy usually called about refills. Sunday mornings, when I would automatically start building a grocery list in my head for a house I no longer entered. Habit is a strange form of grief. It keeps setting a place at the table long after the person or the role has been removed. I still went to work. I still reviewed title chains, flagged missing releases, corrected legal descriptions that could have wrecked closings if nobody caught them. My desk stayed neat. My language stayed measured. No one at Halpern and Boyd would have guessed that I had been exiled from the family home I had spent most of my 20s keeping upright. At night, though, the apartment changed shape around me. The silence felt different now, less like independence and more like negative pressure, as if some valve inside my life had been opened and everything familiar had been pulled through it at once. I slept badly. I woke with my jaw clenched. Twice I dreamed I was back in my parents' kitchen, only in the dream the cabinets opened to nothing at all, just drywall and studs, structure without content. What hurt most was not even the accusation, it was the efficiency of the replacement. Within days, Evan was in charge of my father's finances, speaking in the broad, confident language of men who mistake access for competence. Marisol was telling relatives she hoped I would get support and take some time to heal, which let her sound compassionate while quietly implying instability. My mother was preserving the fiction the way she preserved expensive table linens, folded flat, protected from scrutiny, brought out only in forms that reflected well on her. I learned all of that through the side channels families create when they do not want the excluded person in the room. A neighbor mentioned seeing Evan's SUV at the house every morning. A family friend from church said, carefully, that my mother seemed under a lot of strain and that I should maybe be gentle with her. That one almost made me laugh. Gentle had been my assigned profession for years. Then came the smaller losses, the ones that sound trivial until they stack. My father's birthday passed without an invitation. Marisol posted a photo from dinner with the caption, "Family, finally breathing easier." Evan changed the Wi-Fi password on the home account we had once all used, which I only discovered because one of my streaming services had been tied to it years earlier. Every detail said the same thing. Not only were they removing me, they were revising the blueprint so it looked as though I had never been structural in the first place. I stopped calling. Not because I didn't care, because I finally understood that begging for correct treatment inside a false narrative only strengthens the narrative. Every unanswered message became material. Every attempt to explain became evidence of my supposed obsession. They had built a room where any sound I made would be used against me. So I got quiet. Not wounded animal quiet. Not collapse quiet. Deliberate quiet. I cleaned out the hall closet in my apartment one Friday night and found a canvas tote full of things I had absent-mindedly brought home from my parents' house over the years. An extra set of utility bills. Appliance manuals. A locksmith receipt. A copy of last year's property tax assessment with my father's notes in the margin. I sat on the floor for a long time with those papers around me, not crying, looking at the handwriting I recognized better than some people recognize their own faces. My father had trusted me, maybe not enough, maybe not in the end, but not nothing. That distinction mattered. It kept me from turning the whole past into a lie, which would have been easier and less true. Families like mine survive by forcing false binaries, saint or problem, loyal or unstable, included or outside. I had lived long enough inside that system to know clarity rarely arrives as a grand revelation. More often it arrives as subtraction. You lose access. You lose illusion. You lose the last excuse for staying arranged around someone else's convenience. By the second week, I started running again before work. 3 miles along the river, cold morning air against my teeth, my body remembering a rhythm that belonged only to me. Then I began staying late at the office to study the senior compliance files nobody volunteered for because they were tedious and complex. Probate transfers, estate disputes, quiet property fights wrapped in polite paperwork. I was not planning anything yet. I was stabilizing. That is different. Ash does not look like strength. It looks like aftermath. But it tells you one important thing. Something already burned. Rebuilding did not start with a breakthrough. It started with repetition. I got up at 5:30. I ran. I showered. I made coffee strong enough to feel medicinal and reviewed one difficult file before the office came alive. Then I spent the day tracing ownership through divorces, deaths, missing releases, and the paper ghosts people leave behind when they assume no one will ever look closely. Precision became my shelter. Not because work replaced family, because work obeyed sequence. At Halpern and Boyd, my department sat on the quieter side of the building, away from the conference rooms where attorneys performed confidence for clients. We were the ones who cleaned up what confidence skipped over. My supervisor, Denise Carver, noticed before I said anything. Mid-50s, silver bob, navy dresses that never wrinkled, and a voice so even it made excuses sound childish. One evening, close to 7, she stopped at my desk and looked at the stack of probate transfer files beside my keyboard. "You've been volunteering for the ugliest ones," she said. "They're interesting. They're unforgiving. I looked up. So are most things worth understanding. Instead of moving on, she sat across from me. You're building something, she said. Try not to build it entirely out of injury. I held her gaze. Denise was not the kind of person who asked unless she already knew enough to ask well. I'm trying to make sure I'm good enough that no one can narrate me into something smaller, I said. She nodded once. Useful phase, not permanent architecture. Then she tapped the margin notes on one of my files. You're excellent at this. If you want more responsibility, stop waiting for someone to notice. Ask for the certification track. The certification track meant state coursework, 6 months of supervised review, and my name attached to decisions that affected actual closings. I had considered it before, and talked myself out of it the way capable women often do, by calling readiness arrogance. I applied the next week. From there, life became smaller and stronger at the same time. I stopped leaving emotional doors half open. I muted relatives whose concern came wrapped in surveillance. I stopped checking Marisol's social media. I changed the emergency contacts on my employment file, which took less than 2 minutes and felt strangely ceremonial. Sometimes, dignity begins in clerical updates. I studied at my kitchen table under a brass lamp that made the apartment look warmer than I felt. Weeknights were title standards, chain defects, recording statutes. Saturdays were practice exams, laundry, and long walks with my phone turned face down in my coat pocket. I cooked for myself. Real meals, things with structure. There was relief in feeding a life no one else was busy revising. That winter, I became close with 2 women from work I had previously known only in office-safe fragments. Priya from underwriting had a precise laugh and a habit of bringing tangerines in her bag like she expected the day to be nutritionally inadequate. Celeste, one of the junior attorneys, hated euphemism on principle. They did not ask me to perform resilience. They accepted facts in proportion. One Friday, after a brutal review, we ended up at a small wine bar across from the office, all dark wood and amber light. I told them a narrow version of the truth, that I had been pushed out after years of handling too much, that people had taken my reliability and rewritten it as overreach. Priya listened with her chin resting lightly on her hand. They confused access with entitlement, she said. Celeste shook her head. No, they benefited from your access and then got threatened by the paper trail. That landed harder because it was cleaner. For the first time, I felt something other than grief when I talked about my family. I felt scale. Their version of me had governed my inner life because I kept treating it like a verdict instead of a local distortion. By spring, Denise had me shadowing high-conflict estate files and reviewing corrected title commitments before they went upstairs. She marked up my drafts in green ink, never read, and her edits were surgical. Define this term. Remove emotion from this line. Be more exact here. Facts do not need decoration. I kept that sentence on a sticky note for months. I passed the first certification exam on a Tuesday afternoon and sat in my car afterward with both hands on the steering wheel, not crying, not even smiling right away, just breathing. The kind of breath that reaches the bottom of your ribs after a long time living shallow. My phone lit up while I was still in the parking garage. An unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the area code. Home. The call came from a number I didn't know, but the voice on the other end belonged to my father. He sounded older than he had 3 months earlier. Not frail, exactly, reduced, as if some unnecessary layer had been stripped off him, and he had not yet decided whether that was humiliation or relief. "Can you meet me somewhere?" he asked, without making it complicated. I almost said no. Instead, I asked where. He chose a bank branch halfway between my apartment and the house, one with a glass front lobby and a coffee kiosk in the corner where everything tasted faintly of cardboard. He was already there when I arrived, sitting too straight in a vinyl chair, one hand on a manila envelope. The first thing I noticed was not his face. It was the absence of my mother. That told me more than any apology would have. He did not give me one, anyway. He cleared his throat and looked past my shoulder before he spoke. "Evan brought me paperwork," he said. "A line of credit, said it would help consolidate things. Temporary." I waited. He said the house should start working for the family. There are sentences that explain an entire person. That was Evan in one line. Asset first, story second, obligation last. "Did you sign anything?" I asked. "No." "Why not?" He looked at me then, finally, because I don't understand the documents he brings me, and when I asked questions, he got irritated. A pause. "You never did that." It was not enough. But it was true. I kept my voice level. "If you want advice about the property, you need an estate attorney who represents only you, not me, not Evan, not Mom." He nodded once, like he had rehearsed being reasonable. From the envelope, he pulled a business card. Harold Pike, Esquire. My stomach tightened. Pike was an old property and estates attorney whose name I knew from county records and a few clean, well-drafted transfer files that had crossed my desk. Serious, precise. Not theatrical. "He drew up my Aunt June's transfer years ago," my father said. "The house was hers before it was mine. He remembers the file." That was when a piece of the structure clicked into place. The house had never been a shared marital asset in the way my family casually spoke about it. It had come down through my father's side, by recorded transfer, and everyone had simply built a mythology over the legal reality, because mythology was more convenient. "I called him," my father said. "He wants to meet next week." I folded my hands around my coffee cup so I would not interrupt too quickly. "Then meet him. Alone. Tell him what you want. Let him explain the consequences. Don't do this halfway." My father gave a tired huff that might have been a laugh in better years. "You always did sound like a closing checklist." "Checklists prevent damage." "Yes," he said quietly. "I know." That was the nearest he came to saying he had misjudged me. I let it stand. Some truths do not improve when you force them into confession. The next 6 months moved with the clean, exhausting velocity of earned change. I completed the certification track. Denise recommended me for a promoted review role that added real authority to my desk instead of invisible labor around it. I began signing off on complex title corrections before files went upstairs, and people who had once passed work across to me without looking up now knocked on my doorframe and waited for an answer. Nothing dramatic, just weight shifting. I moved into a better apartment with larger windows and a lease that did not feel temporary. I bought a dining table that seated 4, not because I had people to fill it every week, but because scarcity no longer deserved to furnish my life. Priya helped me choose bookshelves. Celeste brought over Thai food and a bottle of decent Riesling on moving day. Denise sent a text that read only, "Good. Keep going." Then, on a Thursday in late October, a certified envelope arrived at my office. Inside was a recorded deed. My father had transferred the property to me, solely and legally, through Harold Pike's office, effective immediately, with a reserved life estate, allowing him to remain in the home until his death. Clean language, proper recording stamp, no ambiguity, no theatrics, a structure designed to survive noise. I sat at my desk for a long time with the document flat beneath my hands. I had not asked for it. That mattered. More than that, I told no one. Not Priya, not Celeste, not even Denise. The paper went into my home fire safe beside my passport and certification records, and life continued. My family kept living inside the story they preferred. Evan still bragged, I heard, about what we'll do with the place eventually. Marisol still spoke of me in the past tense of relevance. My mother, according to an aunt who meant well and knew nothing, was grateful that everyone had settled down. They hadn't. They were standing on a floor that had already shifted beneath them. In February, Harold Pike left me a voicemail at 6:14 a.m. "Miss Hart," he said, voice formal and grave. "I'm calling regarding your father. Please contact my office as soon as possible. There are matters that will require the family to be present." That was the moment I knew fate had finally turned back toward the house. And this time, I would not be arriving through the service entrance. My father died on a Monday morning in early March, just after 6. Harold Pike gave me the facts in a voice that had probably carried hundreds of families through the first bureaucratic minutes after loss. Cardiac event. Paramedics responded. Pronounced at the house. My mother had called him because his card was in my father's desk drawer, clipped to a yellow note with 2 words in my father's handwriting, "If needed." I stood in my kitchen while Pike spoke, one hand wrapped around the edge of the counter, looking at the reflection of my own face in the dark microwave door. I did not collapse. Grief, when it has been rehearsed in smaller forms for years, rarely arrives as theater. It arrives as weight, dense, immediate, structural. There are recorded documents and estate instructions that need to be addressed promptly, Pike said. Your father was very clear that all immediate family should be present. Immediate family. The phrase sat oddly in my chest. The funeral was 2 days later. Small church, gray stone, white lilies arranged too neatly around a polished casket my father would have found expensive. I sat in the 3rd pew, not with my mother and siblings, but not far enough back to pretend I was a guest. Heads turned when I walked in, not dramatically. Just enough for me to feel the old mechanism engage, the social hum of people recalculating a story they thought had already been settled. My mother saw me first. Her face did not break, but something in it hardened, as if she had expected grief to keep me away, and now had to revise the day in real time. Evan looked almost offended by my presence. Marisol held my gaze for half a second too long with the same soft concern she had once used as a blade. No one asked me to leave. That mattered too. After the service, relatives formed those temporary circles of condolence families billed in parking lots, black coats and murmured sentences and paper cups of weak coffee no one actually wanted. A cousin I barely spoke to squeezed my arm and whispered, "I'm glad you came," with the tone people use when they know more than they should, but less than they think. My mother never approached me directly. Evan did. He stepped into my path near the church steps, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding his car keys like a prop for impatience. "I'm assuming Pike called you out of courtesy," he said. I looked at him. That's an interesting assumption. His jaw shifted. Mom doesn't need extra stress right now. Then maybe don't manufacture any. He gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Still doing that thing where you turn everything into a legal deposition? No, I said. Just a record. For a second, he had nothing. Then Marisol touched his sleeve and said, quietly enough to sound generous, "Not here." That was her gift. She knew how to sound like the only adult in the room, while still protecting the lie that needed protecting. Harold Pike's office was set in an older brick building downtown, above a stationery store, and across from the county courthouse annex. Dark wood reception desk, brass directory, the sort of place that still used thick cream paper and full names on envelopes. My father had chosen well. It was an office built to outlast performance. We were told to come Friday at 11. I arrived 10 minutes early in a charcoal coat and the plain black heels I wore for closings and hard meetings. In the elevator mirror, I looked like exactly what I had become over the past year. Not untouched, not soft, but professionally assembled. Someone whose life had edges again. When I entered the conference room, my mother was already seated. Evan stood by the window, scrolling through his phone, with the restless entitlement of a man who assumes any delay is disrespect. Marisol sat with her hands folded atop a leather notebook, dressed in tasteful grief. All three of them looked up at once. The silence was clean enough to hear the wall clock. My mother spoke first. "I didn't realize you'd be joining us." I set my bag on the chair and took the seat across from her. "I was asked to be here." Evan let out a low breath through his nose. "For what, exactly?" Before I answered, the door opened. Harold Pike walked in carrying 2 red-weld folders and a slim black file box. He was taller than I expected, silver-haired, immaculate in the way older attorneys sometimes are when they have long since stopped needing to impress anyone. Behind him came his paralegal, a woman in her 60s with rimless glasses and the calm expression of someone who had seen families say unforgivable things over stapled paper. Pike looked around the table, then at me. "Good," he said. "Miss Hart, thank you for coming." He took his seat, folded his hands once, and opened the first folder. "What I'm about to discuss," he said, "may come as a surprise to some of you." Evan leaned back like he was ready to correct him. I didn't move at all. Harold Pike did not rush. That was the first thing that unsettled Evan. Men like my brother understand speed as dominance. They fill silence before facts can organize themselves. Pike seemed to understand the opposite. He adjusted his glasses, laid one fountain pen parallel to the folder in front of him, and let the room wait until everyone was forced to sit inside their own assumptions. Then he began with the obituary-level truths. My father had updated certain estate instructions in the last 2 years. He had done so while mentally competent. He had executed documents in the presence of witnesses. Some of those documents affected the disposition of specific assets. Others concerned authority, occupancy, and post-death administration. Pike's tone remained flat, almost gentle. It made every sentence heavier. My mother put both hands around a water glass. I assumed the house would be addressed through the estate. Pike turned one page. "The residence is central to today's meeting, yes. Central. Not simple. Not routine." Evan leaned forward before Pike could continue. "Then maybe we should get practical. Mom will obviously remain there, and the 3 of us can figure out a sale timeline later." Pike looked at him for one brief second over the top of his glasses. It was not a hostile look. It was worse. It was administrative. "Mr. Hart," he said, "you may find it useful to listen before assigning outcomes." The paralegal beside him made a small note without expression. I watched Evan register the correction and fail to absorb it. His body still carried the same loose confidence he had worn in my parents' dining room months earlier, the kind that assumes paper eventually bends toward the loudest person in the room. It doesn't. Pike opened the black file box and removed a certified copy of a recorded instrument. He did not slide it across the table yet. He simply set it near his right hand. My mother saw the county stamp first. Her shoulders changed shape. "I'm not following," Marisol said, soft and composed, as if she were volunteering to speak for the confused. "Are you saying Dad moved things around without discussing them with the family?" There it was again, the word family used as a weaponized blur, something broad enough to absorb any individual boundary my father might actually have chosen. Pike folded his hands. I'm saying your father discussed matters with counsel and executed legally effective documents. Family discussion is not a legal requirement. Evan gave a sharp little breath. That seems convenient. I kept my eyes on Pike, but I could feel the temperature in the room shift toward me, as if the old story had already started hunting for its most useful villain. In my family, whenever structure appeared, someone looked for a woman to blame for understanding it first. My mother turned to me then, slowly. Did you know about any of this? A year earlier, I would have felt compelled to answer in a way that soothed her, to protect her from the tone of her own question, to prove I was not taking satisfaction in her uncertainty. That version of me had cost too much. I knew my father consulted counsel, I said. Beyond that, Mr. Pike can explain his file. True, precise, no extra flesh. Marisol's expression barely changed, but her fingers tightened around her pen. Evan looked from me to Pike, and back again with the dawning irritation of a man realizing the room may contain a system he cannot charm his way around. Pike finally lifted the certified copy. For clarity, he said, the residence is not passing through probate as part of the residual estate. Silence. Not cinematic silence, real silence. The kind where people stop moving because their bodies need one extra second to understand the sentence before reacting to it. My mother blinked first. What does that mean? It means, Pike said, ownership of the property was transferred by recorded deed prior to your husband's death. Evan sat up straight. To who? Pike did not answer him immediately. Instead, he turned the document so the recorded stamp faced the center of the table, then lowered it with deliberate care. I did not need to look down to know what sat there. I had memorized the shape of that page months ago in my own apartment, under my own lamp, while the rest of them were still planning a future built on assumptions. Marisol spoke before anyone reached for it. There has to be some mistake. That is unlikely, Pike said. Evan pulled the paper toward himself with more force than necessary. I watched his eyes move across the page once, then again more slowly. The way people read when the first version their brain offers is too incompatible with their ego to accept. His face did not fall apart. It tightened, line by line. My mother whispered, no. Not grief, not yet. Disbelief. If you have ever sat in a room where people suddenly realize they were not ignored by fate but outranked by truth, you know how quiet it gets. No one wants to be the first person to say the wrong thing in front of a document. Evan looked up at me. For the first time in his life, he looked uncertain. When did this happen? He asked. Pike reached for the second Redweld folder. That, he said, is where the rest of the record becomes important. Harold Pike opened the second Redweld folder and removed a yellow legal pad, 2 witness affidavits, and a typed memorandum on his firm's letterhead. Before anyone speculates, he said, let me establish a sequence. Beside him, his paralegal turned to a tabbed section in the file. Your father first contacted my office 26 months ago, Pike said. He requested a private consultation regarding the residence, its chain of title, and his options for transferring ownership while preserving his right to occupy the property during his lifetime. Evan stared at him. Why? Pike's expression did not move, because he wished to. A small silence followed. Then Pike continued. At that meeting, your father explained that the house had come through his family line, that one child had carried the practical burden of its maintenance for years, and that he had concerns about pressure from other family members who viewed the property primarily as a future payout. My mother's voice thinned. He never said that to me. Many clients discuss intentions with counsel before discussing them at home, Pike said. He lifted the witness affidavits. The deed transfer was executed properly, witnessed properly, notarized properly, and recorded with the county the same week. My paralegal, Miss Elaine Mercer, was present at the signing. Miss Mercer also prepared a memo, confirming that Miss Lena Hart was not present, did not instruct this office, and was not consulted in the room. Elaine Mercer looked up for the first time. "That is correct," she said. "Your father came alone. He was clear, calm, and specific." "Specific about what?" Evan asked. Elaine folded her hands. "Specific that Lena had already done more than anyone else to keep that property functioning. Specific that he did not want the house treated like a reward for personality. And specific that he did not want her punished later for being the only one who understood what the house actually required." No one in the room breathed normally after that. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Still, if I moved too soon, they would turn it into triumph. This was not triumph. It was correction. My mother's eyes shifted to me, then away. "So he just gave her the house?" Pike answered. "He transferred ownership subject to his retained life estate. In plain terms, he remained entitled to live there during his lifetime while vesting title solely in Miss Hart." "Without telling the rest of us," Marisol said softly. The softness did not help her now. Pike slid the memorandum toward the center of the table. "There is more." The memo was dated 6 months after the deed transfer. I knew that period. It was the season when my father had started asking me oddly precise questions about liens, lines of credit, and what happened when people borrowed against a residence they did not fully understand. Pike tapped the page once. "Your father returned to my office after a conversation with Mr. Evan Hart regarding a proposed home equity line," he said. He wanted the file updated to reflect that the prior transfer remained intentional and that no family pressure should alter it. Evan's face changed then. Exposure. "I never pressured him," he said quickly. "I was trying to help." "That is not how your father described the meeting," Pike said. He opened the memorandum and read a single paragraph without drama, which made it hit harder. Client states that son speaks of house as if already his to leverage. Client states daughter Lena asks what property needs. Son asks what property can do. Client wishes record to reflect difference. No one interrupted. No one could. It was one of the simplest distinctions I had ever heard, and it cut cleaner than accusation. What property needs? What property can do? Marisol recovered first, because she always did. Even if that's true, it still doesn't explain why Lena was treated like some secret heir, while the rest of us were left in the dark. I turned to her before Pike could. "I was left in the dark too," I said. "I was locked out of that house months after he signed the deed. I was accused without being accused. I was removed from the family because all of you found it easier to believe I wanted something than to admit I had already been carrying it." No one answered. My mother's hand trembled against the water glass. Elaine Mercer reached into the file box and withdrew one final item, a sealed envelope with my father's handwriting across the front. "For the family, if needed." Pike rested 2 fingers on it. "I had hoped the recorded documents would be sufficient," he said. "Given the tone in this room, I no longer believe that." He looked at each of them in turn. "So now," he said, "I think we need to hear your husband's own words." Harold Pike opened the envelope with the kind of care usually reserved for evidence and old photographs. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper, folded once, with my father's handwriting on both sides. Pike read silently for a moment, then looked up. "This is not a formal testamentary document," he said. "It does not alter the recorded instruments, but it does clarify intent." My mother made a small sound in the back of her throat, not protest, anticipation. Pike began. If this letter is being read, it means there is confusion, or someone is pretending there is. The house is Lena's because I chose the child who understood responsibility before reward. No one moved. The wall clock kept ticking above the bookcase. A siren passed somewhere outside on the street below, muted by old brick and distance. Inside the room, the air felt denser than sound. Pike continued. She kept this place running when the rest of us got used to it standing on its own. It never stood on its own. It stood on her time, her labor, her memory, and her ability to notice what the rest of us preferred not to notice. My mother closed her eyes. Not for long, just long enough for everyone to see. Then came the line that finished it. I did not leave the house to the loudest child, the most charming child, or the child who knew how to look wounded in a room. I left it to the one who carried the weight without making a performance of it. Evan's face went colorless first. Marisol's stayed composed for half a second longer, then fractured at the mouth. My mother gripped the water glass so tightly I thought it might break. No one could mistake the categories, not after that. The letter went on, and somehow became worse for them, though the language never rose. If Lena is being treated as greedy, unstable, or manipulative, then whoever says so is either protecting their own interest or refusing to admit how much they relied on her. I let that happen too long. That part is on me. I felt that one land inside my ribs. Not because it repaired anything, it didn't. Because it was accurate. Pike lowered the paper. He did not dramatize the silence that followed. He simply let it remain what it was, the collapse of a version of events that had protected 3 people for far too long. Evan found his voice first, which was predictable. "This is insane," he said. "A private letter? That's what we're doing now?" Dad was old. He got influenced. Pike did not blink. "The deed was executed while your father was competent, witnessed, notarized, and recorded. The letter is corroborative, not operative. You are free to dislike it. You are not free to undo it. Facts don't need volume." Evan stood up too quickly, palms flat on the conference table. "You have no idea what Lena has been like behind the scenes." That was the last move. When evidence closes in, attack character. I looked at him steadily. "You mean the scenes where I paid for emergency repairs, organized Dad's medications, tracked tax notices, and got locked out for it?" His mouth opened, but nothing sound came out. Marisol tried next, voice low and careful. "No one is saying you did nothing. We're saying this was handled in a way that divided the family." I turned to her. "The family was divided the day you decided my labor was natural and my access was suspicious." She dropped her eyes. My mother still had not spoken. That, more than anything, told me the old order was gone. My entire life, she had been the final editor of family reality. She softened, recast, redistributed blame, and called the result peace. Now she sat in a law office with a recorded deed, a witness affidavit, a dated memorandum, and her dead husband's handwriting stripping the finish off 20 years of narrative. She looked at me at last. "I never said you were greedy," she whispered. "No," I said. "You just built a room where everyone else could say it for you." The sentence stayed there between us. Pike set the letter down beside the deed. "At this point," he said, "the legal position is straightforward. The residence belongs to Miss Hart. Mrs. Hart's occupancy rights, if any, derive from whatever arrangements Miss Hart elects to make going forward. The estate's remaining assets will be administered separately." There it was, not just exposure, transfer. My brother sat back down slowly, like gravity had changed without warning. Marisol said nothing. My mother stared at the grain of the conference table as if wood might offer a version she could still survive inside. I had imagined this moment once, in the raw months, as something hot. It wasn't. It was cold, clean, final. By then, no one in that room was asking what I had done. They were all staring at what they had. What surprised me most was not that I had the power. It was how little interest I had in using it cruelly. Harold Pike asked whether I wanted a few minutes alone before discussing next steps. I told him no. I had spent too many years being discussed in adjacent rooms. If there were going to be terms now, they would be spoken where everyone could hear them. I folded my hands on the table and looked first at my mother, then at Evan, then at Marisol. For once, none of them looked away because they were confident. They looked away because they were tired, and because the story they had been living inside no longer fit the room. "I'm not selling the house," I said. Evan gave a sharp laugh that collapsed before it fully formed. "Of course." I kept my eyes on my mother. "You can remain there for 90 days while we decide what a stable transition looks like. During that time, no one takes loans against the property, no one moves funds through the house, and no one brings in outside buyers, appraisers, or contractors without written notice to me." Evan opened his mouth. I lifted one hand, not dramatically, just enough. "No." He stopped. That was new. I turned to Pike. "I want occupancy terms drafted in writing, utilities documented, insurance confirmed, access limited, new locks at the end of the transition period." My mother flinched at that last line. I noticed. I did not soften it. She had watched a chain sit between us and called it reasonable. "Structure remembers." Marisol finally spoke. "So that's it? You're just going to turn this into a transaction?" I looked at her. "No. You did that first. I'm just refusing to let emotion obscure the paperwork again." For a moment I thought she might try to cry. Instead, she sat very still, hands folded over that untouched notebook like a student who had arrived certain she knew the material and now understood she had misread the entire course. My mother's voice, when it came, was smaller than I had ever heard it. "You would really put me on terms?" There are questions that still carry their own old hierarchy, even after the hierarchy is dead. Embedded inside hers was the ancient assumption that motherhood itself should remain above accountability. "Yes," I said, "because love without terms is what let all of this happen." She stared at me. I did not raise my voice. I did not list everything she had done. The room already contained enough evidence. Sometimes restraint is the most exact form of memory. "I'm not humiliating you," I said. "I'm preventing a repeat." Harold Pike made a note. Elaine Mercer slid a legal pad slightly closer, already structuring the outline that would turn sentiment into enforceable language. There was relief in that. Boundary is easiest to dishonor when it remains verbal. Evan tried once more, because men like him confuse persistence with leverage. Dad was angry. He was emotional. This doesn't have to become permanent. I turned to him fully then. "It became permanent the day you decided the house was something to unlock value from, instead of something to care for. A beat. You were never being practical. You were being entitled." He looked down. Not because I had wounded him, because he knew the sentence fit. Marisol asked, very quietly, "And us?" It was the first honest question anyone in my family had asked me in months. I answered it honestly. For now, distance. No surprise visits. No triangulating through relatives. No retelling me into a villain because the paperwork embarrassed you. If either of you wants contact with me later, it will be direct, respectful, and based in facts, not mood, not revision. My mother closed her eyes again. When she opened them, she looked older, not punished, just unrehearsed. I didn't know how bad it had gotten, she said. I believed that was partly true, which was the closest thing to mercy the day was going to receive. You knew enough, I said. That was the line. Quiet. Final. By the time we left Pike's office, the rain had started. Fine, cold March rain, turning the courthouse steps dark and glossy. My family moved toward the parking lot as a cluster out of old habit, then seemed to realize, all at once, that habit was no longer structure. My mother paused, as if she might speak to me privately, then thought better of it. Evan kept walking. Marisol gave me one long look I could not fully read, and then followed them. I stood beneath the awning for a minute after they were gone. My phone buzzed with a text from Denise. Thinking of you today. And another from Priya, just a tangerine emoji and a heart, which somehow was exactly right. Small, real, undemanding. I smiled for the first time that day. A week later, I went to the house alone with a locksmith, an insurance binder, and a folder of drafted occupancy terms. The front hallway smelled the same: cedar, dust, old heat. The umbrella stand was still there. So was the hairline crack in the foyer tile I had once meant to fix. I stood inside the doorway and let the place settle around me without rushing to fill it. It did not feel like victory. It felt like truth after a long distortion. I was no one's servant now, not theirs, not the old stories, not even griefs. The house was mine. More important than that, my life was too.